Hello again. So in my last video, I went through the fact that movement and positions can be broken down into certain types or archetypes, and each one of those types of movements have set requirements to be able to do that movement correctly. Last week I covered the lunge, we talked about hip extension, and I did think about going through, just going through each archetype systematically from there, but each one of those archetypes all has some sort of organisation around the spine needed, which I'll go further into in a minute. So I thought what would be a good place to start, or a better way to continue, would be to go through what's called a brace neutral spine, and then I can build up from there, okay? So, and the reason for this is that all good movement all starts from the centre of the body with like some sort of organisation around the spine. It's not always brace neutral, on the most part it is, before moving out into like, stable shoulders, hips, and then into your limbs and things like that. So as this is the place where everything starts, it should be a place where, a place that we sort of cover quite early on. So, so a brace neutral spine, so a neutral spine, first of all, is just your spine's natural position. There's two natural curvatures. As you can see at the top, it's got a natural curvature at the top that can become exaggerated from, your occupation, especially if you're someone who sits at a desk all day long, get quite tight. That can be, come quite tight there. And as I've explained in other videos, it's quite easy for this area to become, exaggerated as well. This curvature at the lower back. And this can be down to sort of tight hips and all sorts of different factors that can come into that. Now, when we're moving, what we're looking for basically is to have our two natural curvatures not exaggerated. And then what we're going to be using is, tension in your core. And I'm not just talking about your ab muscles here. I'm talking about like your obliques, your lower back and everything. The tension in your core, plus the way you breathe by taking some air down into your diaphragm area, you can hold it into this area here, allows you to create what's called midline stabilization. Okay, so once this area, this midline is stabilized, it's a lot easier to keep, particularly your lumbar spine here, which is this lower part here. It's a lot easier to keep it in the position that's required. Okay, and this can carry across to all sorts of things. As I said, most types of movements have a brace neutral spine. There are exceptions where you have something a little bit more dynamic, which we'll cover at a later date. And I always find like the easiest place to start with what's this brace neutral spine is to start on the floor. Okay, so I'm just going to get on the floor here. And I always find it a bit weird, laying on the floor on camera. I'm just laying flat on my back. And the reasoning for this is one, we haven't got any load going through the spine here. So there's nothing, when you put a weight on your back or over your head or something like that, there's a load going through your spine. And there's always a bit of a risk that while you're playing around, moving your spine about a little bit. There's always a risk that you could do some damage there. I'm not saying don't try and organise your spine with a weight on your back or anything, but in terms of when we're learning, this is probably the best place to start here. So as you can see, no load going through my spine, and all we have to do here, we've got a simple sequence that we can use. Hopefully you can see my feet. Let me just knock these shoes off quickly. So I'll start out a little bit. So what we're going to be looking to do is, first of all, we're going to be pointing your toes, okay? So when you're in this position here, so get into that position. And we're going to point your toes, first of all, and squeeze your glutes, okay? And what you're going to feel is this is going to bring your pelvis into a neutral position here. And this plays a little bit into there. If your hips are so tight here, sometimes it can be hard to get your pelvis into that position. But let's just assume your hips work as they should. You can get into this position here. Your feet are together. And what we're going to be looking for now is to take a nice deep breath in through your nose. Breathing in, and what you're going to feel like is just going to lift this area up slightly. So what we're going to want to do is, as you breathe out, you're going to tilt your rib cage downwards, and this is going to make this rib position nice and neutral here. So we've got neutral pelvis position, we've got neutral rib cage, and the only thing that can happen now is this spine position here to be neutral, okay? And it's generally, say for instance, you start pressing overhead and you arch this rib cage up. This is when you start getting this real sort of lower extension. You can see my hand coming through the bottom here, okay? So, like I said, there is some curvature of the spine there, but it doesn't want to be exaggerated to that point where it starts putting pressure into the lower back and hurting, putting you at risk, okay? So that's just what I want you to practice first of all. Just start off, point your toes, breathe in, come down to there, okay? Now, to hold this position, like this isn't too difficult in this sort of scenario here. Now, I'll show you ways in a minute that we can challenge the position. But what we're looking to do is, like I said, create that midline stabilization so it makes it a lot easier to hold this position. And to do that, what we want to do is, like I said, you want to feel that tension in your core. So you want to be able to tense up not only your ab muscles, but into here and your lower back, okay? Now, a good way to test, a lot of people find it a little bit difficult sometimes to contract different parts of their body here. And a good way to do this is Just put your hand up, pinch your hand onto here and just cough. And you'll feel, as you cough there, you'll feel like this involuntary muscle contraction in this oblique area. So you've got a feel for that. Once you've coughed, you can get a feel for that. Now it's up to you to try and create that in a voluntary way. You know, you're consciously trying to keep this tense, keep that tense. And you should feel like when you're here as well, you should feel some tension in your lower back as well, okay? So this is like almost creating this like 360 circumference of contraction all the way around here, okay? So it's like a big sort of like belt almost going around there. That's partly why people use weight belts as well, just as a bit of an assistance all the way around the body, okay? Then what we can do with that as well is that we can breathe in as well. So let's just say we've got your spine in that. So you're coming in, squeeze your glutes, point your toes, tilt your ribcage downwards, get that tension in your core, like I just explained, you know, tense all the way around. And then if you're used to breathing through your nose now, what you'll feel is like, you know, you've just put a load of air into that position. And you can see I've breathed through my nose, I've taken air into that position, but I'm still talking. And in fact, I can still breathe in and out of my mouth, you know. So what you'll find then is like, a good way to test this is like, let your air out. If you're breathing through your nose, you feel your stomach will move first, yeah? If you're breathing through your mouth, you feel your rib cage will move first, okay? So what we're looking for is to get some air down into this movement, and it almost creates like, you know, coupled with that core, it just creates this nice solid position here, okay? And then a good way to start a challenge position, like first of all, you could just like lift, let me just come back slightly. You could lift one leg up, and you can feel like a little bit of, you know, it doesn't require a lot, depending on how strong your core is and how, you know, how much practice you've had at this. As soon as you start lifting up that second leg, then it starts really challenging the position. Like what you will feel here is that your lower back wants to arch up here, okay? So it's up to you. So again, just reset, get to that position, point, and it's up to you to like, keep your hands here and fight on that, okay? So don't let it arch up. Now, obviously there's a couple of bits here that, you know, the head is in a pretty good position. It's on the floor. This is something that you need to consider more when we move into like the more standing up variations of this sequence. But one thing you always want to make sure is that your shoulders are nice and pinned back. And you want to think about your shoulder blades being, you know, you don't really want them like, you know, rolled right forward like this, shoulder blades sort of chicken winging out. They don't need to be completely flat either, but, you know, nice and flat, shoulders back, hands by your side, tilt your ribcage down, tense your core, take some breath into there, point up to there, here, hold that position, okay? Now, obviously if that's quite hard for you, just bring everything closer to the center line. Basically, the more, you know, the closer you bring everything to your center line, the easier it is to control. And then what you can do over time is to start bringing your legs out, challenging the position a bit more, bring it lower here. This is probably the hardest position you'll have for this exercise there. So what I would do is to focus on that. I wouldn't focus on time. I would focus on some breathing. So one way you can approach this is just to do, let's just say we're going to do 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out, and you can change it up as much as you like. So it's like breathing in through your nose for 3 seconds or so, and then breathing out your mouth for 3 seconds. And use that as a gauge for how long you're doing the exercise. So if you're in here, come into there, and we're just going to say, if you can make each breath last 6 seconds, you could do 5 breaths, and that's going to be 30 seconds. You do 10 breaths, you're holding that for 60 seconds. And what we're doing here, we're not just focusing on the time and making this like another throwaway exercise where we're just focusing on reps or focusing on speed, like with a lot of exercises, or just the time. We're focusing on breathing and holding a good position, okay? And like, if it's a thing that, okay, like I can do 3 breaths, but on the 4th or 5th breath, I start to lose my position, then that's the time to stop, reset, get yourself into that position again, and then maybe try and get the 2 breaths again. So never think that you can't stop. There's no one here going to be going, oh, just get on with it, you know, just get on with the workout and all that bollocks. It's just like literally lay out the floor, get in a good position, practice that, and if you need to reset the position and do it properly, okay? So that's something for you to practice there. What I want to cover in the next one is how we then build upon that, how we then use like the shoulder stability, hip stability, what should be going on with your feet, and we'll just build things up from there, okay?